Hey guys, can we get your attention back here, please? You can bring the pizza. We're not fussy. And beer, please. Drink more.
Cool. All right.
I'll just hold it. Do you want me to hold it?
Is that good for sound?
Yeah, I'll just hold the torch for both of us.
There? Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Erin. I'm one of the product managers at Cloud Conformity. Well, that sounds really echoey. My role essentially is working with different parts of the business to prioritize features, scope them out, get them through development, and then work with sales and marketing.
And I'm Micah. I'm a full stack engineer and I code stuff.
Cool. So who's heard of Cloud Conformity?
Before today, guys.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, last night it was announced we're acquired. So we are now part of the Trend Micro team, which is super exciting. Yay! Cool. So our vision is to be the global authority on public cloud infrastructure for security and governance. So that's really, it drives everything that we do. We have a whole series of checks which we run against cloud infrastructure environments, and we'll then tell you if they meet best practice or not. So those checks can be used for reporting against compliance standards. They can be used for all sorts of things, yeah. So our talk tonight is going to focus on control versus innovation and how we do that at Cloud Conformity. So we are focusing on ShiftLeft. Has anyone heard of ShiftLeft as a concept? Cool, all right. So yeah, how we innovate within a controlled, secure environment. And we'll show you a little bit about the journey that we've been on and also the journey that we see our customers on, because it's really the same journey. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is really cool to be in this community, I have to say. And so one thing I'd like to share with you guys before we start is I'm sure all of us have a personal hacking or exploit hall of fame. And I just wanted to share one of my favorites with you guys. It's not really intrusive or crazy or anything. It's just a little bit silly. I hope you like it. So this is the website of the 2010 EU presidency, which at the time was chaired by the Spanish Prime Minister. And it was set up on his 6-month tenure as the president of the EU. So it was supposed to be a commemorative website. This was what it looked like before a hacker had his way with it. And this is what it looked like after. I don't really see the resemblance. I think it's an inside joke. Look, I know you guys find this funny. I had a chuckle when I saw it. But honestly, if this happened in one of our organizations, we would be flipping out, right? We would be pointing fingers. We'd be months of investigation. And the normal response, especially in bigger organizations, is to double down on security measures. You know, try and have stricter controls, monitor everything that the staff is doing, every request for an EC2 instance, slap it with red tape. That's never going to happen. So this kind of response is proven to be sort of inefficient, and on top of that, it's also ineffective. I mean, it's destroying the very thing that our high-performing teams set out to do in the first place, which is to innovate. And that's the last thing we want to do, essentially. So the importance of ShiftLeft is understanding that this can actually be pushed back in the development cycle and done at an earlier stage. And this is important because it allows our teams to innovate and understand pain points where hackers can potentially attack much, much earlier.
Cool. So what is ShiftLeft? Well, it's one of those buzzwords in the industry at the moment, the latest and greatest trend that everyone wants to do but doesn't really know how. So essentially, as Micah said, it's really shifting the focus of testing and automation and quality assurance much earlier in the development process. And in context of security, it's shifting security left as well. So introducing it at a much earlier stage in the product development lifecycle. So we're really saying that it even starts before the first architecture diagram has been drawn, before the first line of code has been written. It's at a much, much earlier stage in that product concept stage where you're talking about the very first idea. So this aligns really with the modern way of developing products, being agile and working really closely, being cross-functional and all of that sort of stuff. So security still own the security responsibilities, but they're sharing it and they're inviting everyone on that journey with them.
So there was a Microsoft talk some years ago, and the speaker once said that there are two types of organizations: those that have suffered a cyber attack and those that will. So this was some years ago, and it's become part of our lives, hearing about a breach or hearing about a leak. So we can pretty much say it's inevitable that you will suffer a cyber attack. And I think because during that time the paradigm was you only consider something to be an attack when you feel the pain of it. So when the DDoS actually occurs, or when there's a ransom note for customer data. But now that we've become more security literate, I think we can rephrase this in a better way. So there are two types of organizations: those that have suffered a cyber attack and those that don't know they have. This is where the advent of ShiftLeft really shines, because before, if we even target the possible vulnerability way before in the product design stage and the business case stage, we can actually see that we're no longer just waiting around for vulnerabilities to happen. We're not just barricading ourselves. Instead, we're proactively reacting to changes in our own system and helping our security policy evolve as we go along.
Cool. So these are 3 stages that we see ShiftLeft as being able to be introduced. So as I said, at the very first stage, when you're talking about the product idea and saying, hey, we've got this great idea, we want to take it to the market, at that stage, we can be talking about security. And obviously there's levels within that, but we can be talking about what market are we in? What compliance standards do we have to comply with? What data are we going to collect? What kind of risk is that going to expose the business to? So there's all these questions at a very, very early stage that we can introduce. And these are the kinds of questions that will get the attention of your business stakeholders and of your product team, because these are the questions that they will understand. They may not understand the details of SSH, but they will understand these questions. So really talking about the high levels, making sure that the cost of any of those requirements are built into the business justification as well. So when we're talking about the cost of getting a product off the ground, we need to be aware of these costs involved, because otherwise we won't factor them in and we might approve a project that's not actually feasible. So the next stage is really where we've been living for the last couple of years, going from a startup to a scale-up. So talking about getting customers on board, essentially. How can security be relevant to getting customers on board? Well, we've found at Cloud Conformity, particularly in focusing on larger businesses, corporates, enterprise, there's so much due diligence that you have to go through. And if you don't have security practices in place, you will not get through that process. So security then becomes a business enabler. Again, this is something that will really resonate with your business stakeholders and with your product teams, because if you explain it in this way, they will understand that the cost has a benefit. So looking at the internal policies that you've got, the practices you have in place, and prioritizing your resources as well. So making sure that these are actually allocated in your sprints when you're developing code. And then that translates down into your development practices as well. So identifying vulnerabilities. No one likes to admit they have them, but of course everyone does. Codes, it has vulnerabilities, same as bugs. So tracking them, identifying them, tracking them, prioritizing them, classifying them, understanding them in the relationship to the vulnerabilities around them or the code around them. So where do they fit in the context of your platform? Obviously things like test automation are really helpful there. Penetration testing, white hat hacking, all those kinds of things will help you identify those risks. And explaining them then to your product managers as well and your business stakeholders will help you get allocation of resourcing to actually fix them. So at Cloud Conformity, we've got SLAs in place where we say, if anything is identified that could potentially fall into this bracket, we will address it within a certain period of time. We also have, in every sprint, we have an agreed standard allocation to proactive measures. So we're proactively reinforcing our security posture and building additional layers in. So as I'm sure you're all aware, security is a layered approach. You've got to continuously build these layers in, and we're constantly looking for areas where we can reinforce the security within the product. Cool. All right, so now it's a little picture of where we see security in the industry. It's also, I guess, so starting here, we've got the stages that people go through when they're adopting cloud. Cloud is what we know, so we'll talk about cloud. So you go through these stages essentially from on-premise or no cloud activity through to a fully optimized cloud environment. Then, so what I've layered in next is what we see within security. So how that journey mirrors cloud adoption through to security adoption of security measures. So this is the journey that we've been through. Our founders actually worked for a government department in a cloud migration project, and they identified weakness in the industry. There was no product in place that helped them through this journey. So this is the journey that they went through, and it's the journey that we've went through as well. Luckily, we had their learnings to jump us in a head start, but it's a journey that's common to everyone. Security practices take time. To get to a mature space, that take time. Cool. So then I've layered in, so this is the rough size of workloads in the cloud. Essentially, it's just growing exponentially every year. It's projected to keep growing, so there's really no stopping the cloud. And then this is roughly where our features fit within this journey. So looking at different stages of maturity, we have features that cater to different people. So when you're first starting to think about security and you really don't know what you should be doing, what it all means, we have a public knowledge base which caters to those early stage people. It's a public knowledge base, so anyone can go up there. They can check every rule that we have in our system has a page associated with it, and you can read through the explanation of the rule, why it's important, and how to fix it, how to fix the failure if it's found. So then you'll see the curve goes up in the middle maturity bracket, and that's because that's where most of our customers sit. There's actually very few who are in the high-end, very mature stage. So, don't feel bad, anyone in the room. There's not many people in that space. There's a huge amount of people in the middle bracket. There's people getting into that high-level maturity, but that's really where we're building ahead of market to try and build features and to push the market. We really want everyone to get to that really high stage. Yeah.
So why is this important? Basically, it's often seen that a lot of development teams and security teams don't quite see eye to eye when it comes to the maturity of a product. We like to think that growth of features is the main driver for sales. It's the reason why we're all here and we're all interested, and security is normally taking a backseat. So the importance of really what we're saying with ShiftLeft and what we've actually implemented in our own organization is in order to bridge the divide between very innovative dev teams and security teams that are just trying to keep them in check, it is to let dev teams understand and be involved with the security team in designing the code, knowing where it's heading, knowing the product roadmap and the features that are going to be planned out. So I'm just going to step back from that a little and talk about compliance standards. So not always a humongously fun topic for everyone, but one that is extremely necessary. And one that should be both of importance to security teams and developers alike. So this is the AWS well-architected framework. So it stands for these 5 pillars. Erin touched briefly on the importance of having compliance standards for winning certain businesses and ensuring that you have your compliance scores very high. But this has an additional benefit of actually informing the way you architect and design your cloud infrastructure. Operational excellence basically means that you understand your underlying business value and what resources contribute to that, and ensure that it's always evolving and being supported through these processes. The security pillar ensures that obvious things that are obvious to us, authenticate at every layer, give the least privilege to specific roles, ensure that permissions are more specific, and predefine roles based on the purpose of the team. Performance efficiency and cost optimization, this is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, we can always aim to be efficient and to save a lot, but the well-architected frameworks are actually helping you achieve that throughout your different business goals. And reliability means it's something that we don't often think about, but it's definitely necessary, is the recoverability from failure, and disaster recovery plans in case something happens. How quickly do you bounce back from that? So we've actually based the 500 checks that we run on our platform on the well-architected framework. So these 500 checks are measured against the customer's account, AWS account, and we assess whether or not they meet all of these standards. And a lot of them to you would seem pretty obvious, but you can be surprised that lots of people miss different things. And as teams are innovating, they actually forget, hey, this S3 bucket is not encrypted, or it's actually open to the public. So some kind of compliance standard would really help to keep you in check along that journey and make sure that you are maturing in those different stages. So Cloud Conformity also uses this framework on our own architecture. This is the problem statement that Cloud Conformity is trying to address. So as you can see here, in development, it takes an X amount of dollars to correct a defect. And this grows exponentially as we grow across the different areas of, different stages of business. So as we continue to develop, it doesn't only take a monetary cost, but it's also a reputational hazard to allow vulnerability to persist all the way to production. And yet, this does happen with a lot of teams in larger organizations in which there are silos, and different teams don't necessarily communicate to each other. And I don't think it's enough for a security team to be responsible for all of these. ShiftLeft is all about dividing the responsibility, and by making developers aware of security best practices much early on in the game, this would really help prevent vulnerabilities like this from happening. So we have a lot of really good examples. We work with a lot of really cool companies. But we'd like to use our own model as our first case study. So this is our architecture. We run a microservice platform rather than monolith. So that means that all of our code is run as lambdas. It's called via API gateway whenever a request from the browser is made. So this kind of architecture really suited us, especially as a startup and a scale-up. It helped us to grow very quickly and expand and use the latest technology from AWS. And actually, it allows our teams to innovate because you can easily create a Lambda function as quickly as you can destroy it. So this sort of lightweight, not having to worry about servers really helped us along our journey. And I think if we did have to worry about servers, it would have taken us a much slower path to our growth. So something like this is very attractive, and I think a lot of people would really jump on the serverless bandwagon without knowing what are the potential security vulnerabilities that could be, waiting just to be discovered. So I've done that pretty much for you. Just in a small scale, there's a lot of dangers associated with serverless that could happen if you're not mindful of those well-architected framework rules. So initially, when the browser makes a request, it is prone to event injection without any suitable validation. If your DynamoDB table doesn't have the right model or a very strict model sort of system that's set up, it's very prone to this. So that's something that is a potential vulnerability. Another potential vulnerability is that in the use of Lambda, there is a wider attack surface because each microservice is responsible for its own security permissions in terms of IAM. And it's very easy to say action star, resources star on everything. And that's, as we know, is an absolute disaster. This also means 78% of indirect dependencies lead to vulnerabilities. And with Node, this is pretty high because Node actually runs dependencies 4 layers down. So you can just imagine that if you let your development team go wild and they just keep adding new libraries, this can get ugly pretty quickly. something simple because it's Lambda. If you don't input correct logging, this is something that can happen. You don't know where the errors are occurring and where there's potential problems in your system, and you'd only find out later on. Additionally, because it's serverless, a lot of the normal considerations that are given with a server full architecture goes out the window. So you have to think about your own endpoint protection and web application firewall. So these are all things that, that's why there's 500 rules, because you can really slip up on a lot of different things. So how did Cloud Conformity address this? So on day one, we would sit a developer down and explain to them all of our different team rules. So we enforce practices like ensuring that we're all using the same IDE, ensuring that their linters are configured in the same manner, making sure that our CI/CD pipeline picks up on any of these inconsistent dependencies, and making sure that our security team is across our entire development cycle. So it's definitely messy. There are definitely disagreements on many things, but keeping up this practice and keeping the security team involved has really benefited us cost-wise and growth-wise. So yeah, if you want to innovate, you have to do the ugly things first. So there's a lot more topics that we wanted to discuss with you, but we are kind of short on time. But another thing that we wanted to raise is because we were proactive in our approach to AWS architecture and saying we want to follow these best practices, we worked very closely with the vendor. We jumped on early, so we were early adopters to these new technologies like Lambda and later on step functions. And by doing so, we sort of preempted what we're trying to achieve, which is making sure that we are well architected. Yeah, so we hope that you guys found something really interesting in what we said today. Just in summary, these are a few key takeaways. So security controls should contribute to your innovation path. So it's not about shunning emerging tech because of the potential vulnerabilities it can create. It's about embracing it early on and ensuring that you're part of this life cycle of the product itself. So getting involved with the vendor, establishing best practices in your team and standardizing it, sharing it, and drawing as much possible attention to making sure that you're following a standard. Which brings us to compliance standards. Another thing to focus on, you might not be wanting to attract a particular customer, but it might be of importance to you to have a standard across your organization, and it's not a bad idea to bring on best practices early on in the game.
Cool. So hopefully we've shown today the benefits of ShiftLeft and in terms of the cost and processes. There's an assumption, I think, from businesses in general that using the cloud is secure. We know it's secure. We know that AWS and Azure and Google all build very secure services, but there is a responsibility. All three of those providers have a shared responsibility model, and as you go through that journey of adopting security within your business, you really have to make sure that you understand what is the customer responsibility, what is your responsibility. So building in those processes really helps with that. Engage your product team, work with your product map, make sure that you're putting items on there. Security has just as much right to inject things into the product map as any other part of the business. So make sure that you get initiatives in there. Proactively engage the team with making sure that security is a factor in the development lifecycle.
Cool. Thank you guys for listening.
Any questions?
Any questions? Yeah, we're multi-cloud, so we have a few rules across Azure as well. Obviously, we're involved in that process too because it's a different set of best practices, but it would align, obviously, with those central pillars.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question for the recording?
Oh yeah, so the question was, a lot of our sites were to do with AWS. Are we doing this across the different cloud vendors as well?
Yeah. So the reason that we've focused on AWS today is because our platform is built in it, but we do have best practice rules across different providers as well.
Any other questions, guys? Nope. Thank you very much.